Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've just been to see Wonka,
Yes.
the origin story that we've all been crying out for since 1964 of Willy Wonka. Roald Dahl wrote Charlie and Chocolate Factory about a little boy who wins a golden ticket to visit the magical factory of Willy Wonka. He wrote that. That was published in 1964. And that's constantly considered one of the great British children's novels. It's an absolute classic. Roald Dahl is one of the great British children's authors, and it's his key work, I think. And that was made into a film by Americans in 1971, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which starred Gene Wilder and was a musical and is, again, beloved. There was another version made in 2005, adapting the same story, directed by Tim Burton with Johnny Depp. Which I haven't seen in a while. It's all right, actually.
I saw it and remember liking it, but actually remember almost nothing about it now.
I listened to the songs, you know. I mean, the thing is, so the songs from the 1971 version, I think were in the book. The Oompa-Loompas sing whenever the children, one of their demises, there will be a song. And those songs were adapted faithfully into the songs in 1971. And there were original songs written by Danny Elfman for the 2005 version. Jose?
What?
Come in here a second. I need to record a correction.
Okay.
Yes, correction. Having just watched a couple of the songs from the 2005 version, because I want to show you them, because you don't remember them, and then checking the book, these are the original songs.
Oh, right. Okay.
As written. Yeah, these are the, well, for the most part, faithfully adapted lyrics, and they were original for 1971.
All right.
I knew I got it the wrong way around. There you go. This film is a reimagining of some aspects, but it's clearly based to some extent or remembering the 1971 version. Certainly in that it faithfully copies the design of the Oompa-Loompas from 1971, and it also has a couple of the songs. So the World of Pure Imagination, if that's the title of that song, but you know the one, and the Oompa-Loompa song both reappear here, and they're kind of rewritten and readapted, and new things happen, and there is a whole new score. It's a musical, which I don't think, rather like The Greatest Showman, I don't think the advertising went out of its way to tell you it was a musical, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, because both of the previous films based on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had been musicals. But still, when the film starts and...
I didn't expect it to be a musical. I mean, I hadn't read anything on it.
When the film starts and Willy Wonka's on the boat and he starts singing, I'm like, oh, God, it's going to be a musical again. Right, okay. And then we'll see how it goes, you know?
Yes.
Because I'm not against musicals. You always, I think, kind of think, oh, God, he hates musicals. And I don't. I like good musicals. But when you've forgotten that it's likely to be one... when you've forgotten that it's likely to be one, or you haven't really been told, then, you have to adjust. And I think that's kind of why they don't... Because like The Great Showman made so much money, was hugely popular, but they didn't tell anyone beforehand. They didn't go out of their way to say this is a musical, because I think they can't sell musicals, you know.
And yet, all of the Disney films are all musicals. So I think that's a nonsense, and I think it's particularly nonsense in films that are largely addressed to children, like this one is, I think.
This version is directed by Paul King, whose work we've talked about before. We talked about Paddington 2. He also directed Paddington 1. And I think he's written or writing the next Paddington, but I don't know if he'll direct it. And you can see a continuity. He also has some regular collaborators. So Hugh Grant returns, Sally Hawkins, Tom Davis, one or two others. But he's also working with new people, and the main one is Timothée Chalamet, who plays Wonka.
Who is wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, from the moment... So I didn't expect it to be a musical. And there's that moment where he lands in the city, and there's the gaslight, and he just twirls around the gaslight before landing. And I thought, oh my God, this is wonderful. Because it was like so musical and rhythmic and surprising and, lovely to see, right? It was just kind of, just a curlicue of pleasure, really. So that completely won me over. And I think I remained won over for the rest of the film, really. I think, the thing about these Paul King films is they have such a such a good nature, right?
Mm.
Like they're so warm. So often they're dealing with quite dark things, right? Kind of, in this case, if you look at it, it's kind of, young people who are cheated, imprisoned, their lives taken away from them, abandoned, et cetera, et cetera. And yet you really don't feel that through most of the film because, they're constantly encountering kind of warmth and kindness and good nature, right? And I think Timothée Chalamet's triumph is to pull that off,
Mm.
to
They're,
just
they're characters who also deal with their circumstances with a sense of humour and irony. They
mm,
know the circumstances that they're in, and there's a lightness to the way it's all played,
mm.
which doesn't it doesn't fail to get across that it's a terrible situation that they're in, but it handles the tone of that quite nicely.
I think if this is marketed properly, it's surely the Christmas film of the year, really, because I think it is like a film for the whole family, and it's really inventive and yet good natured and kind, and
Mm.
it's people in difficult circumstances kind of coming together and winning over evil as represented by this cabal of chocolatier
Yeah.
that really do represent the kind of a corporate culture that's hoarding all the money, and they're an oligopoly, and they control everything, and they have the
Mm.
police in their pocket and so on. It kind of
It's interesting to have a children's film that talks about things in that way, like, and it's not a kind of. I mean, if you think about like Rumpelstiltskin,
mm,
yeah, that was about like the contract of if you can guess my name, then you can get out of the deal, sort of
mm,
thing. But it's like it's about kind of the evils of the contract, sort of thing.
mm,
But a lot of that's going on here, so they get caught by the small print
mm,
into effectively indentured servitude for the people who are putting them up. You've got the deal that's eventually made at the end with the chocolatiers, which again, which although it's supposed to be a faithful deal, they've added a little bit onto it, which they haven't said, which is that we're also going to murder you.
yes.
um, but and you got
But actually,
this
it's
whole
also a bad faith deal in the sense that the young girl is meant to be free, and in fact,
yes,
she isn't.
yeah,
So,
there's that as well. I mean, that's the one thing I was thinking when Wonka's going off, having made the deal, and thinking I'd be going. I want to see them free first, then
mm,
not go. um, and there's a whole, as you say, play with the police, and that the police are in the corporate pocket, and that they're doing what they
mm.
want, and
And the
um,
church.
yeah, and there's no suggestion that these are like social goods for the people.
Mm,
They are goods for the people with power.
mm,
Um, so it's kind of interesting to have that so easily and legibly put across in a film that's for children.
yeah.
You know.
It's got such a good tone and kind of such a good mood, really. And I thought it was beautiful to look at and really visually inventive. And visually inventive in a kind of an offbeat way. Yeah, so, the giraffe and the milking the giraffe and then the bringing the giraffe to the church,
Mm,
with this adorable giraffe that nonetheless looks completely out of place in every place, right?
mm.
I thought, there's a kind of a quirkiness to the visual humor that I really loved.
I was actually fairly impressed by some of the visual design, and
Mm,
and it's not just it's not just in the big things like the setting thing, but it's in things like the shot selections. The way things are staged. Things are
mm,
staged for the frame. It's not
sure.
just shot reverse shots. I mean, there's an element of that, but there's an awful lot of you're looking at people's faces as there is in
Mm,
any film. But there is always an intention to frame something in an interesting way or way that is providing a joke or whatever it might be.
mm,
It's attentive to the way it looks.
mm,
Although I do have an issue with the color. I made a crack to you at the end that the credits had more color than the rest of the film because they're in pink and yellow and a little bit of green. And of course there is color in the film, but the issue that I have is that, and I think this way about the Paddington films as well, is that it's also muted. It's also muted that, and I think part of it is that there's so much use of CGI that it's an attempt to make everything kind of fit and not have anything look too out of place. But I find that, and it's a funny thing that I find with British films that do this. I think the same thing about the Matthew Vaughn films, Kingsman, in particular, where the visual effects, the CGI is. I mean, obviously CGI is phony, right? It's been made on a computer, but there's something particularly phony looking about the way it comes across in these British films that I don't quite understand. The animation is a little bit too smooth, and the rendering of the way light kind of plays on the objects that have been inserted is a little bit too flat. I find it really. I don't like to look at it. I wish it looked better than it does.
Yes, well, I'm not sure that I agree. I thought the color was very deliberate. And I thought there were moments like, the flight over the night sky with the balloons, right? Where everything looks very dark, black almost. But the balloons are like really kind of intensely colored, almost neon colored. I thought that was beautiful.
I would disagree with the word neon. They're brighter than everything else. But
well, no, at that moment, I think they're neon. I think you're right about the rest of the film being muted, but to me that just kind of demonstrates a knowledge and dexterity with the use of color, right? That it's kind of reserved for particular moments. And I thought it was very well judged. I think it would have been weird to have, because, the film also has, what's the term when you have something both futuristic and Victorian?
Steampunk.
The film has a little bit of a steampunk feel to it, right? So, I think it would have been wrong to make it, if you make that too bright, then it destroys that kind of, Victorian kind of dimension to it, so I like that for most of the film, the colors are kind of muted, but, there are moments where they do spring out, and I like that very much. I thought it was like, wonderful design that leaves room for other things. So for example, I thought the whole scenes in the cathedral kind of had a very different feel, than in the laundry jail, right? Which had to do with sheen, which almost, so I liked all of that actually. And you were saying at the end how, it would be nice to see a musical with people who could sing.
Yes.
And I really was charmed by Chalamet. He reminded me of Audrey Hepburn in Funny Face, right? You might know or remember that Audrey Hepburn was dubbed in My Fair Lady, but she uses her own voice in Funny Face. And of course, she's got a tiny little voice, very charming and very expressive, right? So she's not a singer, but she is someone being very expressive with her singing, with the voice God gave her, right? Which has much more of an emotional impact than that almost soulless kind of, perfect singing that you get in My Fair Lady. So Chalamet isn't the best singer in the world, but I thought he's completely charming, and I'm really glad that they used his voice.
So here's the point I would make, is if they had embraced that naturalness, and imperfection of someone who's not a born singer but is doing, having a go at it and whatever and doing their job, I would have really enjoyed that. I don't think that's what's happening here. It's through the production of the songs, generally speaking, are quite richly produced, and I enjoy that. They're deep, and you hear the different, you can separate out the instruments, that kind of thing, and they're nice to listen to, right? But the vocals are produced and perfected to this, auto-tuned, and they all sound so tinny because of it. I wish they had sounded more natural. Right. They don't. I find them really kind of overproduced. I was talking to Matt the other day. He was thinking about he was telling me how shit music was in the mid to late 90s, when the Spice Girls in particular were the biggest thing. Because and he's right, because I've never really listened to the Spice Girls, but if you go back and listen to those songs, the production, and it's not just the voices, it's kind of everything, is so cheap, and like it's on drum machines and all the rest of it.
I like those songs,
but the production is dreadful. If the production was good, then there'd be a whole other dimension, because they're not like badly written or anything, but it's the production. And here, it's the production of the voices. It just sounds so cheap and bad, and like they're scared of.
You've just alienated all of our female audience from the ages of 20 to 60.
And the gay men.
And the gay men.
It's just the fact of it. And the production here I find really off-putting, because it's like a fear of something that is like a little bit riskier. You know,
I loved it. Because Chalamet, I mean, he is someone who went to the High School of Performing Arts and he was taught how to dance and how to sing, right? It's just he doesn't have a great voice, but he doesn't have a terrible voice.
no. But that's so you can use it. Why don't they?
Well, I think they did. I mean, and I think those qualities came through. I found it very endearing. I liked watching him perform, and actually, I thought he was brilliant. Really, because so he's no longer a boy, really, yeah, and he doesn't have that kind of ethereal beauty that he had in Call Me by Your Name, right? There's something about his face now that, I mean, obviously he's still a handsome person, but there's a thinness to the face. You could see how he's not going to necessarily age very well. Yeah, he's got like a bit of a nose, in profile. He's got an odd looking kind of hawkish face, really. And yet, he's kind of very warm. So he's in this performance, he looks, he's someone you look at, but he's also got a bit of a wonky face, yeah. Right. Which I think makes him endearing and makes him kind of, someone to connect to and with. And he's kind of very winning. Yeah, he doesn't do a lot. His gestures are kind of minimal, though he's got a gesture for everything. He's been clearly choreographed. And he handles it very lightly in a very approachable way. I loved him in this.
So the film took me a while to get into. It took a while to win me over, although I think eventually it did. Rather like with Paddington 2, that took me about an hour to like work past how much I hated the kids and that sort of thing. And just the way it was trying to get it off. It just wasn't working for me. And this film, like I said, I start off going like, who needs a fucking Willy Wonka origin story? I've never cared about wanting to know what the character's past was. In that 1971 film, I don't remember the books well. I think I did read it when I was young, but I watched the film a lot. He was this kind of goofy, mysterious, enigmatic guy. The whole thing is like the crowds gathered around the gates waiting for him to come out. We're going to see Willy Wonka. He's been in there for ages and all that kind of thing. And then you get in there and he's just kind of goofy, mad scientist, and that's what it's like. And I never needed to know how he grew up and where the factory came from. But they've invented this backstory for this, so fine. And I did sort of start off asking sort of sarcastic questions of the film, like, why hasn't he got a fortune already if he can already make magic chocolate that controls people's minds? But if you go into the film asking those questions, and there are lots of them you could be asking, then you won't ever get in tune with it, right? You just have to kind of accept that this is a guy who has like magic powers of some description or like alchemical powers. But he's going about making his fortune in a way that doesn't exactly doesn't take advantage of them in a mind controlling fashion, that sort of thing. So you just have to kind of go with it. And once I started to go with it, and once the film started to get a little bit more anarchic, the film starts off with a lot of, I'm here to make my fortune. I have a dream about what it'll be. I'm gonna and you go, fucking hell, like it's pretty dull and pretty. And the thing about his mother, I just can't be arsed with the story about his mum. My mum who I love, and she made me this bar of chocolate.
And usually you're so sentimental.
Well, yeah, but and you the opposite would go like, I really expect you to look at the story with the mum, the backstory thing, and to go, what a load of crap.
No, I like that.
I really do. But then once, and the new songs didn't impress me much at the start. But I was thinking like, maybe they grow on you, and maybe the kids will like them. And
new
stuff.
Songs are always a problem because you've never heard them
exactly.
before.
So you don't sort of discard the film because of that. And once it got to working with the other guys in the poorhouse, the slop house, whatever.
Yes, I love that.
And then they start, escaping from the place and selling chocolate on the sly and stuff, because the whole story is about not being allowed to sell your chocolate because of the cartel, and the police being on your back. It was around the song when I tell you, I can remember the exact moment I started to get in tune with the film was when Wonka reveals to the other guys that he's made a contraption that will put the dog on a treadmill to do all the work, and like that moment I thought, oh right, I'm starting to feel this, yes. And then you go into this song where you jump from kind of room to room and building to building as they're singing about selling all this chocolate and how great it is and whatever. I think that's around the same time that they're going down the storm drains.
Mm.
Well, they keep calling them storm drains. I call them sewer grates. There's a lot of Americanisms in this, and you're like, is this supposed to be set in England? I don't know.
Well, it's not set in London. It is just like
it's
this big city in Europe, because some of the architecture is clearly like from Prague, and some of it is from Paris, and some of it is from London. So it's got like this European city look.
Yeah, so like the building that he wants to sell his chocolate in, where the other three shops are, is the Gallery. It's not Lafayette, I don't think.
No,
it's something similar.
I forget what they call it in the film.
But it's French, basically.
Well,
it's. I mean, the name is French.
Well, initially when you go, you thought they were going into the Piccadilly Arcade or something like that, but it has a French name.
So it has a French name, is what I'm saying, and as you said, there's architecture that you can recognise from all over Europe, including London.
Yeah. I mean, some of the greenhouses, are very British.
Yeah, there's a definite kind of Crystal Palace thing going on with some of the constructions, and of course you've got the two people running the I keep calling it a slop house, but the prison basically.
It's forced labour of a
place.
laundry,
and that's Olivia Colman and Tom Davis, and they're both playing Cockney. Tom Davis is straight up Cockney. In fact, I saw him on stage because he's a stand-up, and I saw him on stage recently, and he told the story about doing a shit in Timothée Chalamet's trailer where he didn't mean to. I really like Tom Davis, by the way. He's in a show.
Wonderful in it.
He's in a show called Murder in Successful, which is just the best thing ever. And he had a much bigger role than I expected him to as well.
Yeah.
Because I knew he'd be in it for a bit. He was in Paddington too for a bit. He's just one of the prisoners, but he has a reasonably sizable role here, and he does very well. And I didn't know Olivia Colman, and so basically, anyway, I'm talking past the point. Basically, like, this is kind of set in some conglomeration of European cities and styles.
Victorian, turn of the century Europe.
But there's a certain degree of cockneyness to it, brought to you by those two characters. When it comes to the use of language and accents, it's basically either Cockney or American. And American, I think, just feels really out of place in some of it.
It doesn't to me.
But although, of course, in the 1971 film, which this film is connecting to in some ways, Gene Wilder is American, and just the whole, he's just American in that film, and it's made by Americans, and those people are American. So, again, you can take issue with it if you want, and it does fall weirdly on my ear, but
you're a minor part of the audience. The majority of the audience will be North American, so
yeah, exactly. You think like these are the people it's being sold to, I just think storm drains.
I mean, I didn't even notice. Well, for obvious reasons.
Yes, because you're the colonizer.
Says the Brit. Anyway, I really loved it. I liked the tone. I liked the good nature of it. I like the winning over adversity. I like the message that, chocolate is at its best when it's shared with friends. I loved it.
When that thing comes up at the end, I said to you, it's like it's just like that slogan is straight out of a Cadbury's Christmas advert.
Well,
share your chocolate with your friends. Cadbury.
Lovely message and true. So
not true. I bought an 860-gram bar of dairy milk, and it's mine.
That's because you're greedy.
Yeah, no one else is fucking having it.
Chocolate is the only person I know who doesn't like to share their food.
Chocolate is best.
It's mine, all mine.
Chocolate is best enjoyed when you are depriving others of it. This is my message.
So, I want to talk a little bit about Chalamet, right? Because I just think he's so great in this, and he was like he was a kind of a revelation in Call Me by Your Name, right? And of course there was the typical thing where people thought he was really great, and then there was all this backlash, and there was actually kind of a lot of gay backlash around it. And then
why? What was that? What did that consist of?
Well, kind of there was one section of a gay audience, I suppose, a gay male audience that loved the film, like I did. There was another section of the audience that thought it wasn't queer enough, right? And the whole thing with the peach drove them crazy.
They
And
wanted more explicitness.
yeah, they want to be queerer,
Hmm.
yeah, more in your face or more contradictory or more anti, less heteronormative or whatever. And a hatred of Chalamet went with it, yeah, that, here's like this twink and whatever. But that's just a sector of the audience. He obviously got a huge following amongst young girls, right? Which is, always a good thing, but it could be a limiting thing. And then he really, I thought, kind of proved himself in a whole series of films. He was just absolutely wonderful in, what's it called, Beautiful Boy, where he played like a meth addict, right?
I don't know it.
Yeah, it was with Steve Carell, where he played the son.
Right. Yeah, it rings a bell.
I thought he was wonderful in that. And then he appeared in hits, but really his wasn't the main role, though he kind of redefined the role. So in Little Women, the part that he played, which was the Joe's childhood friend who she turns down for marriage, is often like a key part, but a minor one, right?
Hmm.
And he turned it into something else, and he was very, very good in the film. I think also the film was written to give him more of a role in that. And I loved him in the Woody Allen film, which for some reason idiots despise. It's one of those really enchanting romantic comedies, that only Woody Allen seems to do at the moment. And actually, maybe it's because it's Woody Allen that people
Well, yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a super romantic. It uses the Great American Songbook, as part of the mood of the film. And I thought, he was enchanting in it. And it's kind of, he played like pure charming leading man in that, right? And it's almost like when he doesn't come across as quite a man yet. And then I think in the last year he really made this transition from Dune onwards, right?
Mm.
Where I think now he does look like a man and not a boy, if still somewhat skinny and gangly and so on. But his features, now take on a different shape. He's kind of lost, that kind of puppyishness that kind of adolescents have, yeah. And he's just continued to be very good in a great diversity of roles, really. So,
Well, I wasn't looking forward to him in this. I thought it looked like miscasting from the trailer.
right.
And I think part of it was that the trailer also lent heavily, or not heavily, but to some degree, on the sentimentality.
Right.
The Wonka coming to unnamed, unspecific European city for his dream, and the thing about it's you and me, Mama, it's time, Mama, and all that. I had that in the trailer, and you thought, oh right, they're going to really be playing on, and Chalamet's going to be playing on that. So it's not so much him exactly, but I just thought they seem to be conceptualizing the character in a overly sentimental way that I wasn't looking forward to, and his performance, from what you could get from the trailer, seemed to play into that. And of course it does when they do that in the film, but the film is doing other things with it, and it has a lighter and wackier tone at times, and that's when I like the film the most, and I think he is a good fit for it. So he works out for me in the end. And I'd just like to say as well that I knew about Chalamet before you, because I saw him in Homeland.
Well, I saw
he was great in that. I noticed him in that as well.
Right. Well, I saw that Homeland, but actually he didn't register with me at that point.
I thought in 5 years this boy will be the most hateable twink.
Hateable twink is, how a part of the audience thought about him. But I just want to point out also that what he does is very difficult, because the film is very sophisticated and it is satirical, and it has an ironic tone, but he is absolutely sincere in it, right? And you buy into this world where these things are possible and so on because of that kind of warmth and sincerity. And he's not playing down to the role, or he's not looking at, he's absolutely inhabiting that kind of sincerity, which is very, very difficult to do, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it was a problem with the trailer that it missold the tone of what the film was going to be. Because it is, although I'd say it didn't get many laughs out of me. It did a couple. And I don't think I was trying to be, uncharitable. I don't think I was sitting there going, I will not laugh at this. I could see where it was trying to get laughs, and it does it a lot. And there are all sorts of types of jokes in it. But a lot of them weren't really working for me, and quite a few of them have to do with that kind of like adding one or two bits of dialogue to sell awkwardness or a miscommunication between characters, that kind of thing. I just thought, no, I'm not into this. But then there are times, and maybe it's unsophisticated, but when Keegan-Michael Key shows up fat all of a sudden because he's been bribed with all this chocolate, and it's like because that happens in a montage. Like he's been bribed with all this chocolate. He's the head of police, and he's been bribed with all this chocolate to take down Willy Wonka. And even though that happens in a montage, he doesn't get fat in a montage, and then you just cut, and all of a sudden he's enormous. Great laugh. And there were one or two others that really made me laugh. But for the most part,
actually, I think the film made me laugh in all kinds of different ways, and they weren't like huge laughs, but they were like, kind of appreciative kind of laughs at almost everything. So, when they go into the zoo, and the guy eats a chocolate, and then they're describing how there's champagne and so on, and then the whiskey, and then he calls his girlfriend, and it's all filmed like a film noir with a shadow. I thought that was like, wonderful. And when he collapsed, I laughed. And then the whole Hugh Grant thing, which takes on a completely different I found all of that very funny and very inventive in a kind of a cliche-ish British way, but that again worked on me.
Well, it's interesting because despite being the Oompa-Loompa who is from far away, like the Loompa Land, he is uber British.
Yes.
Hugh Grant playing at his most British. And kind of,
Well,
and it's not just the accent, but it's also the kind of the refinement and the taking offence at people's behaviour kind of thing.
Yes.
It's like it's fully embodied in the Oompa-Loompa character.
It is. Though of course, maybe for most of the world, like this is Oompa-Loompa land.
How do you mean?
Well, because so you're saying that Hugh Grant is meant to embody something foreign and exotic, and and so I think for most of the world, he inhabits that through the Britishness rather than in spite of it. Anyway, it worked very well.
It did work very well. It is interesting, the reconceptualization of the Oompa-Loompa figure here. We only get one, or we see a couple others who that one lives with in a flashback, but we only see one, which is the Hugh Grant Oompa-Loompa, and it's reconceptualized here not as someone who Wonka went to Loompa Land and found and brought back to the factory and work, but as someone who has agency, a role, an opinion, an attitude, who ends up going into business with Wonka.
Yes,
as opposed to being a subject of.
Yes, and who's out to get his due.
Yeah.
So he's after this because Wonka owes him.
Yeah, well, Wonka came to my land and took from me.
Exactly. So
and it's
yeah. So there's kind of like I mean, if one looks at that through the lens of colonialism, that is in itself a very interesting kind of.
Well, I think that was always one of the things, or has been one of the things that people have talked about in the past about the idea of the Oompa-Loompas and the fact that they were originally pygmies. It, kind of just exacerbates that. It kind of adds to that reading. But it definitely was there, and I don't really. You can definitely see like the anti-woke, crowd going, "How dare they change my story?" and blah blah blah. And to an extent, I was kind of thinking that at the start. Not like I'm like a great protector of Willy Wonka, but just like it's a story, and the original film has been very important to me, and I grew up with it and so on. And you think, what are they going to do with my story? But actually, you then start going, it doesn't fucking matter. It's just a story.
Yes.
And they can change it to something more interesting if they want, and more wholesome if they want, and all the rest of it. And it works. It really works. The Hugh Grant character is really good in this, and the fact that he plays off Wonka so furiously is part of that.
Yes, it's funny how Hugh Grant has become like a national treasure by being exactly the same as he's been all along. Right? And it's a measure of how things have changed around him, really, rather than him changing. Because, of course, I thought he was adorable in 4 Weddings and a Funeral. But, this country is so mired in class that, there was a whole sector of the audience that just hated him purely for being middle class.
Well, I think he's playing up to that in these now.
Sure.
And he's playing it as a comic role. And the comic role is partly based on the fact that he built a reputation of this type of character.
Yes, that it's him.
Yeah, exactly.
It connects to his star persona. And he's brilliant, and he's incredibly charismatic.
He's very reliable in these kinds of roles these days.
Yes.
Also Rowan Atkinson as well. I thought is really reliable. Like when he has a film built around him, it doesn't really work.
It can be too much.
Yeah. And the films just generally there's always something lacking. They're not very good. But when he plays a bit part, that bit in Love Actually where he wraps the gift, it's just like, it's really memorable. And he's just this guy in a shop wrapping a gift, taking forever over it, but it's extremely memorable. And here, as the priest, it's wonderful. In fact, that was the other big laugh the film got for me when he picks up the phone during the funeral service and says, "Hello, pulpit." What a great line, and how so brilliantly delivered,
And visually, that whole thing is dazzling. So it's a combination of a verbal wit. Oh, this thing protected by 500 monks. And there's a way of, so there's the line, the way that it's said, but then the visuals that accompany it, which is like, all these mechanical contraptions of going further down. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's very nicely done.
Visually dazzling.
Yeah. The guy who plays the guard at the zoo, who you see in Silhouettes, by the way, is the co-writer.
Oh, wow.
With Paul King, Simon Farnaby, who's written, he's from kind of British comedy and stuff.
Right.
Paul King himself comes from like the Mighty Boosh and things, so done a lot of TV directing before he started making films.
Right.
Well, that's kind of where they all come from. And you can also see, I mean, if you're particularly familiar with British comedy over the last, say, 15 years, then you see all sorts of people that you recognise from it.
Right.
Like Phil Wang and Charlotte Ritchie are the couple.
Who is Charlotte Ritchie?
She's so the couple who get together, who get married because they ate the chocolate.
Oh, right, yes.
That's those two.
Oh, lovely.
The guy, let me just get his name because I can't remember the actor's name. Patterson Joseph, who plays Slugworth, who of the three, he's the main one. There's also Matt Lucas. The other one I don't recognise. I don't know if he's a particular figure from British comedy. But there are quite a few of these figures, and you see, but Tom Davis is one. And of course, Olivia Colman. I mean, although she is now the megastar Olivia Colman, who can do what she wants and won the Oscar and so on, was such a key figure in British comedy.
Right.
Kind of, I'd say 10, 15 years ago. And you remember her from all sorts of things. I particularly remember her from Green Wing. I think I've mentioned before. I think whenever we've talked about her, I've mentioned how much I loved her in Green Wing, and that she was one of these figures who you really noticed when she was on screen, and it's not that you thought, oh, she will win an Oscar for playing Queen Anne, but you thought, wow, she's wonderful, and she's got to be about our best actress. She's incredible. Her range is ridiculous.
Well, she's wonderful in this, that's for sure.
Yeah,
and it's very broad. It's like a little bit of what's that Stephen Sondheim musical? Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber.
Oh yes, Street. Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's a very broad performance that Olivia Colman does. It is a little bit like Angela Lansbury in Sweeney Todd, and it works beautifully. Yeah,
and I was just saying that the Matthew Bainton is the third of the chocolatiers in the cartel, and although I've been saying, if you're familiar with British comedy, he's in Peep Show, he's in Gavin and Stacey, he's in things, but they're just not shows I've watched. So other people will recognise him. I'm just not one of them because I never got into Peep Show, despite the fact that that's the one that people think is the fucking best one in the world, and is it bollocks? I didn't like it.
Anyway, to get back to the film, any last words?
Well, I was surprised that I got into it, although maybe, as I said, I shouldn't have been, because I did end up getting into Paddington 2 and enjoying it rather a lot. And once I kind of discarded all those thoughts of like, this is my Willy Wonka and I remember him, blah blah blah, and you just go like, it's just a fucking story, it doesn't really matter all that much, and it works really well. I mean, you also kind of thought like, oh, of course they've got to turn this into a story about a heist and a action and blah blah blah, but no, it worked.
It worked, and I think it's a much better film than the original. So I was pleasantly surprised, and I really loved it. And actually, it's quite a track record that King has now, because I think all three of the films that I've seen, I think he's got 4. I don't know his first. But Paddington, Paddington 2, and these are all beautiful films.
His first one was called Bunny and the Bull.
Yes, I don't know that.
No, tiny budget, tiny box office. Never heard of it. But No, it's Paddington, Paddington 2, and Wonka. Those were his three main, his three other films that he's directed. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it works. I was surprised by it. Well done.
Okay.
I think some of the songs are good. It works. Some of the songs are good. Some of the action's good. Some of the wackiness is good. So it makes me want to watch the 71 one again. To be fair, because the songs reminded me of it, of course, because two of them are the same. And a couple of things that I thought were lacking here, particularly that vibrancy. I really vividly remember from 71, where it's basically a theme park that they walk into, and of course it has that Roald Dahl nastiness, which is you just walk around waiting for children to die. Fantastic, that's what kids want. And then what other film has a load of kids die and then you sing a song after each one to celebrate? Well, you should have listened. Don't be such a greedy little brat. And all that.
Yeah, so this film is not like that.
No, it's more sentimental, but it does work. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.